to gather themselves in the aftermath. So yeah. Knock, knock, Esther said. Dad looked up mid-bite and waved. Mom dropped the sponge, jumpy. She turned and seeing Esther seemed to collapse under her own weight. Dad and Esther rushed to catch her, but she managed to grip the side of the sink. She shooed Dad away and then pulled Esther into a hug. The skin of her arms felt like rice paper against Esther's neck. Soon her cheek was damp with Mom's tears. I just don't believe it, Mom said, breath-hitching. I can't believe it. Behind her, Esther heard the door waft open. She stiffened. Meg? Dad said. It's me, Meg said from the living room. We're in here, Mom said. She released Esther, who turned just as Meg walked in. Esther hadn't seen her big sister face-to-face in over a year, and they didn't talk much more often. Meg's dark blonde hair hung limp down her back, and there were streaks of dirt on her sweater and jeans. Before Esther got the chance to say anything, Mom pulled Meg and Esther into a tight embrace. The three of them stood with their heads pressed together, arms tangled at the center. Meg's shoulder was cold and damp, and she smelled musty, like rain and old. Meg's breath hitched, and as she started to shake, the fragile calm Esther had pulled over herself like a blanket unraveled. Hot tears streaked down her face, dripping onto her clasped hands. Mom dug her nails into Esther's hand. It hurt, but not enough. She needed to really feel the pain. She needed to bleed. As Meg cried, she whispered to herself prayers and scolding and apologies, and for the first time since they spoke, it occurred to Esther what her sister might have seen, and her heart broke all over again. When Mom spoke, her voice was low, angry. You'll both stay here tonight. I only live down the block, Mama, Meg said. I'll be close. No, Mom said. I need my children under my roof. Meg hesitated a beat, then nodded. Okay, yeah, I can do that. Good girl, Mom said. Esther pulled away, and when she looked at her sister, Meg avoided eye contact, focusing her gaze somewhere on the floor. Mom stroked Esther's hair, and Esther absently leaned into it like a kitten. You two can sleep in the bigger room, Mom said to Esther. The way the three of them had played musical rooms over the years, age and spats and nightmares making revolving doors of the upstairs, neither Meg nor her sisters could lay claim to any room with any real validity. Except Claire, whose room would be just on the other side of a very thin wall, somehow too full and too empty at the same time. I can sleep on the couch, Meg offered before Esther had the chance. Mom shook her head. Nonsense, you'll have a bed. Won't take but 2 shakes. She left Meg and Esther alone in the kitchen, Dad having disappeared. For a man who'd spent the better part of his adult life surrounded by women, he seemed to have a particular aversion to female emotion. When Esther was little, crying around Dad was a no-no. He'd leave the room, wiping his clothes and face like tears were contagious. Work, Meg said. Esther frowned. What? He went to work. Their surprise must have shown because Meg continued. Your face is doing that crumpled thing. Esther ignored the dig. Dad went to work? Now? Meg shrugged. He's dead. His daughter just died. Is him staying home going to change it? Meg sat at the table, an avocado green and rusted metal relic they'd had since the Dark Ages, and started picking at the laminate. You know how he is. He has to keep busy. Esther made a non-committal noise before going to the cabinet for a mug. The coffee pot was half full and, thank God, still warm. Do you ever think about that day? Meg asked. Esther paused for the briefest second, wrist deep in the cabinet. No, she lied. She poured a large cup of the strong coffee, held it to her face to let the steam warm her nose. Claire did. Claire was, remember what she used to say? She said the darkness was coming. Esther ignored the chill sliding down her back, swallowed the 2 hot coffee burning her tongue. Meg's voice cracked. She said it's coming for all of us. Thank you. Did you hear that? The darkness is coming for all of us.
Do you want to grab that?
Oh, I suppose.
What's the best? Oh, okay.
We're just going to shout, but this will work too. I'm tangled. That's okay. I'll scooch this way. We'll be fine. Sit. It's fine.
All right. So, first I want to start off and say that I really enjoyed your book.
Thanks.
Yeah, there was a lot of darkness in it, though.
Yeah.
So this wasn't actually one of the questions I wrote down, but it came up in conversation beforehand. You mentioned that this book captured your sisterly trauma.
Yeah.
So it's
yeah.
about a relationship between 3 sisters. One of the things I think came up again and again is they all sort of felt responsible for the others in whatever bad happened. Like, why wasn't I able to do more for my sisters? Can you talk more about sisters and what that means for you?
Yeah, so I am one of 6 children. 3 of us are sisters. And my sisters and I now are very, very close. We were not so much for a while. The 2 are twins, so backing up, when I was 6 years old, I asked my mom, more than anything, I already had 2 brothers, I was like, please, for the love of God, give me a sister. I'm begging for a sister. No problem, she gets pregnant, out pop twins, built-in best friend, leaving Katrina alone. That's okay. But yeah, I being the eldest, I always looked out for them. I was kind of like the second mom. Now, having moved here, my sisters live in Florida now. Oh, please, hurricane, be gentle. Allison, one of my sisters, has become kind of the de facto older sister because she's there and I'm not, and we all kind of share these sister responsibilities, trying to wrangle our parents, wrangle our other siblings, and looking out for each other. And for me, the sister relationship is really unique because a really good friend, they're like really good friends, but a really good friend will, lie to you to be nice. Your sister will rip you apart and get to the truth of the matter for you, and sometimes that's really what you need, is someone to rip you apart and then put you back together again. And I think that's something that sisters do, and I really wanted to focus on that kind of dynamic in this book, that sisters are both our worst enemies and our best friends.
Yeah. I don't have any sisters. I have a brother, so I just get like the ripping you apart without the friendship.
Yeah, my wife is the same way. She only has a brother, and so if my sisters come over, or we're having a family, get together, and we're all just like climbing on top of each other on the couch. We're grown women, almost in our 40s, but we're still like tugging on each other's hair and biting necks for no reason. She's like, I don't understand this. Why do you do this? I'm like, it's a sister thing. Just shush. It's okay.
So you talked a little bit about location. I want to talk about where this book takes place because that seemed really important to the story as a whole. So it's town of Blacklick, which I sort of took to be like an outer suburb of, it's in outside of Chicago, right?
Yeah, it's in Indiana.
Oh, Indiana.
It's a made-up place, so I don't think it really makes a difference. But I did want to base it loosely on Gary, Indiana, so a very industrialized town, kind of a poor town where you have a lot of people who have moved on, and therefore you have a lot of places that are just left. There's no people for them. And it was kind of inspired by that idea of empty places.
That's like a real thing that's happening, is you have all of these small towns where all of the population are senior citizens, and it's just what's going to happen to all of these places in like 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
And like the things that they've built.
Evil entities are going to take over, clearly.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's going to be stuff left there. And you get that feeling driving through parts of the Midwest that used to be more populated, but all of a sudden are empty. Yeah. Definitely. So I want to talk a little bit more about horror as a whole, because it's October.
Yes.
I always personally enjoy a spooky reading month in like September, October. I read horror at other times of the year, but I especially focus on it. But I feel like horror is really having a movement right now. Yes. Like it's become very mainstream, which I think is so interesting, because I feel like even a couple of years ago, horror writers were like, oh no, we're the abjects. No one cares about us. Can you talk a little bit more about like why people are latching onto this, or like how it became this more mainstream genre instead of one that's like relegated to the side?
So I have kind of 2 theories about this. The first one is the pandemic. I feel like that's kind of really when it started, when I noticed it started like really building, and it was because people for the first time, I feel like, were truly worried. They didn't know what to do with themselves or with the people around them. They were told to be alone, to isolate, to stay away from your family, and oh my God, strangers are going to kill you with their mystery disease we don't know anything about. And people were looking for something that would scare them more than that. You read a horror novel about this ghost that's haunting the house, and there's blood dripping down the walls, and you're at least, well, like, at least that's not happening in my house. People are coughing. but there's no blood yet. It's fine. And then my second theory, which is probably more accurate, is that horror was a very gate-kept white dude genre, as most of them are. And it wasn't until I think more people got the chance, number one, to publish horror, more people that were not cis, straight, white men. And also, they got the chance to publish, but also we got to understand that horror was not just one thing. My understanding of horror as like a middle schooler, high schooler, I didn't really like it because horror to me was synonymous with Stephen King and maybe Dean Koontz to a lesser extent. And I wasn't a huge fan. And so I was like, well, I just wrote off the whole genre. But as I came to realize, and I think as most people came to realize, that horror can be so many different things, so many different voices, so many different stories, so many different, perspectives, people started to gravitate toward that and realize that they do like reading horror. They do like these spaces. They just didn't realize they did until they saw themselves in it.
Yeah, and we were talking earlier, like I mentioned, I can't watch scary movies because I'm like a big chicken, but I love to read horror. I do think there is something to your theory that people just like want something that's worse than their current existence. Like I get asked about true crime a lot, and that's like this. I have a similar theory about true crime. Like people just want to read about something really bad happening to someone else,
right? Which
sounds horrible, but I think sometimes you just need that. You're like, well, I have this horrible thing in my life, but I need to like bury myself in someone else's trauma.
Well, with true crime, for like just while we're on this tangent, I think, well, I read it or I consume it and I tell myself it's because I'm preparing myself. So that one time when someone tries to break into my house or tries to whatever, I will be prepared. I will see it coming, is how I think it will happen. That's totally wrong, probably, but it makes me feel better about it.
I don't know if it works like that.
Well, we'll see.
Okay, so I want to talk about the house in the book. So early on in the book, you learn that like these three sisters enter what is essentially a haunted house, and from that point on, they're like infected with this darkness. I think that the house was meant to be literal, but also I was like, oh man, like we all just have like this figurative house.
Yeah.
And once you go in the house, you just like can't ungo in the house. Like,
correct.
You have to carry the trauma with you for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. And you might be an adult and you're like, oh no, the darkness came back to super haunt me.
Just super haunt, yes.
So can you talk more about the house and what the house means or represents or is?
Sure. Yeah, so I never met an allegory I didn't like. I really, really love them for some weird reason. And to boil it really down to like the very nugget of this book is about what happens when we don't talk about the bad things that happen to us, or we don't talk about the traumas that we experience at all. We just bottle them up, we keep them inside, we pretend it didn't happen. It doesn't go away. It's going to come back. So that's really, you've kind of nailed it. I feel like I don't have to add anything more to that. The house, you go into the house, something happens, and you carry that out with you. And if, it's so mad me even when I was writing it, if these sisters had just taken 5 seconds to be like, whoa, that was really weird. What did you see? I saw something crazy. Let's never go in there again. If that had happened, we would have no story. But when we have these things happen to us, or we experience things we don't understand, or things that are really scary, and we just kind of keep it to ourselves because we're scared that when we say something about it, or when we, vocalize it, it makes it more real. And we don't want to do that, so.
Yeah, and that's the Midwestern way, right?
100%.
You have to hold it all inside.
Yeah, well, I've adopted that. I'm a born Floridian, so. In Florida, we just give you the finger as we're walking by for no reason, so. No holding anything in. I'm very Midwestern. I probably have like a neighborhood of scary houses.
Maybe. Okay, so this is your third novel. Mm-hmm. Can you talk more? Has anything changed in the writing process or in the feeling of publication in having a third book versus the first two?
Yeah, maybe not. I mean, my second book is, I don't really talk about my second book as much because it's like it's middle child syndrome, I guess, or it just exists in between the very far past and the recent past. I do love that book though. I think the biggest difference between the first and anything that comes after, writing your first book, you write it in kind of a vacuum of your own, just your own world, your own timeline, your own, there's really nothing bothering you about writing the book except you. You get to change it as many times as you like, you can put it down, you can do whatever you want with it, and it just exists in its own little world. Then you go through the whole process, you get an agent, you publish, yay, and then they want a second book from you. And then all of a sudden you have the expectations of the readers of your first book, you have the expectations of your agent, your publisher, your readers, you have everything kind of like pressing in on you. So it's, for me, it was much harder to write the second and third book, even though time had passed and I had grown as a writer, and I had hopefully, you know, developed more skills than I had writing the first one. But it was still, it felt like writing books with like a gun to my head, because I was like, I really have to finish. It has to be really good. Oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no. So that's not to say I didn't love it, and I love these books, I really do. But the process is really anxiety-inducing. You don't really think about it. I love doing it, but I'm probably going to die by the time I finish this book. I don't know if you have that experience. I might just be crazy.
No, you're not crazy for sure. I think that there's something nice about just like writing a book for your computer.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, it's nice, you know, I'm sharing this, like it's in my Dropbox, we're all having a good time.
Yes, yes.
And then when you like write a book for like under contract, you're like, oh, a lot of people are gonna read this.
Yes, and they're gonna have opinions.
Yeah, and they're definitely gonna have a lot of feelings about that, and they have like feelings about what you want to write about.
Yeah.
You know, you were saying earlier that you were like really into writing about mermaids, and then like the publishers kind of poo-pooed mermaids.
Look, it was the weirdest situation, I have to say. Like my publishing journey has been anything but normal, from what I understand. So the book that I signed with my agent died on submission, and that one I'm very sad, because that was my Vampire Snow White in a Circus book, which would have been freaking cool. But no, that one's gone forever, because that was 10 years ago, and I'm not picking that up again because it's probably horrible. But then the next book I wrote, which became They Drown Our Daughters, originally began as like a darker retelling of The Little Mermaid, but she had a daughter who was human now, and it was just like there was this whole like replaced child thing. It was really cool in my head. And I wrote this book, and it was awesome, and my agent loved it, and we sent it out. Again, nobody wanted it. But as I was writing the next book, because I am relentless, almost a year to the day after this publisher rejected the book, came back to my agent and said, I can't stop thinking about this book. What if we made it a horror novel? Now, like I mentioned to you before, if I'd known then what I know now, I would have said, it's already a horror novel. I just didn't realize it at the time. It probably would have stayed mermaids, but we made some changes to make it a little more mainstream horror, whatever that is, more very genre-specific horror. And I found that I really liked it, but it was a really weird process taking this book and molding it into somebody else's expectations. I worked really hard at it, and it's still probably, I mean, you always say this about your firstborn, don't you? It's my favorite. So it's like,
Are you saying that as a firstborn child?
Well, yes. I'm also a parent, so I'm allowed. It's fine. But yeah, it was a really weird process, but you know, I lost my train of thought. We started talking about firstborns, and I'm like, wait a minute, my daughter's gonna watch this.
No, I think that's really helpful and really interesting that like you are on your third horror novel, but you didn't start out conceiving of yourself as a horror writer.
No, I didn't, and it's thinking back on it, it makes sense, because a lot of the stuff that I wrote, I called it dark fantasy, but that wasn't really a thing, I guess, or it wasn't necessarily a thing that I understood enough to be able to sell it as a dark fantasy and say that's what it is. I just knew that I really liked dark stories with a mystery and also maybe some supernatural elements. Like Jennifer McMahon does this really well. Like she has a book about fairies that most people don't realize is a book about fairies, and I'm like, that's really cool that you can take a thriller, throw some fairies at it, and what does it become? They call it horror, I guess, or they call it, you know, like a something. I don't even know.
I feel like what's hard about creatures is you have to hit at the right time.
Yeah.
Like I really like vampire fiction, and vampires are back in all of a sudden.
They are, and I'm so worried that it's gonna like saturate, and then people are just gonna be like pounding vampires at my brain, and I'm gonna stop liking them again. So yeah, but you're right. It takes, you know, it takes a minute. There was a very small window of mermaids very shortly after.
There was a
I got
TV
rejected
show,
on that, by the way.
There was a TV show on Freeform about mermaids.
Yeah, about like evil mermaids or whatever. And Mira Grant has Into the Drowning Deep, evil mermaid book. I'm like, people, come on.
Yeah, the Pisces is an evil
Yes,
mermaid book.
yeah. See,
yeah.
it's a thing. It should have been a thing, but you know, maybe next time I'll do evil mermaids.
You're
again.
not wrong. It's the publisher.
Yeah, I'll do an evil mermaids thing eventually. Again, I can't get away from the water. I'm obsessed being Floridian. So.
Should we open up audience questions?
Yeah.
There's
There's two of you. I expect one question.
Yeah.
Or half a question, or just like a well-meaning grunt. I don't know.
I had the somewhat obvious question of, do you have like a favorite horror novel or a least favorite horror novel?
A least favorite. I'm not gonna go there because people talk. A favorite. Oh my gosh, that is a really good question because my brain goes nothing. I've read no books.
Or even just a recent favorite, not an all-time.
So back to Jennifer McMahon. Her most recent, My Darling Girl, is a possession horror novel at Christmas. And I think I have been a McMahon fan for a very long time. And that one I think is her best novel she's ever written. It is like, she's in her like, you're nodding. I feel like you've read it and
I'm
you're
just loving what you're saying.
she's in like, she's having this moment in her process. I don't know what it is. People need to leave her alone and let her write because she is producing some really good stuff.
Let her cook.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Let her cook. Anything? It's okay if you don't. I promise to stop bugging you.
I'm curious how you transitioned to being a published writer from all your early stuff. What was that like?
It is like, how did it feel, or like what was the process? Both.
Experience.
It was a very, for me, it was a very difficult journey. I had always known that I wanted to be a writer, but I did not think I was very good until, I still don't think I'm very good. I did not think that I was at a place where I could pursue publishing until I had been putting out really bad books for a while. I was still trying to find my voice, trying to find the story that only I could tell that was, you know, authentic to who I am and the stories that I wanted to tell. So it was probably about 10 years between the time I wrote my very first like really, really bad book to getting signed by an agent. And my agent was, I had queried, I think, 2 books prior to that, and she was the only yes I got with that particular round of queries. So it's one of those things where you have to be really dogged and really like, everyone hates me, but I don't care. I'm going to keep trying. So it's, I don't think it's for everyone, but I think that anyone who wants to should try. Because if you don't try, then you're not gonna get there. It was hard.
I think your experiences are pretty normal, right?
Yeah,
You're like,
yeah.
oh, this is awful, but almost every single person I know who is like a published novelist has like the same thing, where they wrote a bunch of books that were bad,
Yeah.
spent a long time querying agents who didn't want them. Like
Yeah.
it's never, the process is always longer than it looks from the outside.
Yeah, the overnight success thing doesn't happen unless you're like Victoria Schwab, in which case forever and ever she woke up published, I don't know. But yeah, and also the thing that has always surprised me too is that I assume people are getting published in like the early 20s and they've been publishing forever by the time like I've heard of them. I have met so many, especially local writers, that they're like, oh yeah, I didn't write my first book until I was 35. I didn't get published until I was 40. And they're, 45 now and they've published like 12 books because they're prolific as hell. So I think timing is never a thing to worry about. It's just...
That's the nice thing about writing though, is it's not like being an athlete where you like age out.
Right.
You've got time to do it.
Yeah, you've got time to do it, and you can try so many different things. We were talking beforehand that I wrote, whatever it is I wrote beforehand. Wrote horror for a few books. I'm on submission now with a PI mystery, and then after that, I'm going to be writing some kind of dark fantasy, something going back to my mermaid roots, I guess. Probably not mermaids this first time, but it's okay to like bounce around and find things that you like writing. Delilah Dawson is actually really good at that. She has written across, I think, every genre you can conceive of, and published in every genre you can conceive of, and she's good at it. And I think it's because she doesn't let herself get bored. If she wants to write that, she writes that, which I think is a cool thing. So yeah.
Any other questions?
I was gonna ask if you've heard of a book called Horror for Weenies, which is a book that my friend just published from Cork Books that is about horror movies for people who are too afraid to watch them.
Yes.
I'll have to look it up.
I don't have it, but I have seen the book, and it's Emily something?
Emily Hughes.
Emily Hughes, yeah. Yeah, no, she does articles for like,
Yeah.
about...
Roundups are incredible.
Yeah. No, I'm bugging her all the time, like, okay, look at that. But yeah, I've heard of that, and I'm gonna need to check it out because, like Tasha, I'm not a horror movie person. I can't do it because I'm, with exceptions, like anything Mike Flanagan does, I will watch religiously just because it's my sad girl vibes. I like that. So,
That's fair. I like Mike Flanagan stuff too.
yeah. Except, well, I mean, he does a really good jump scare. I don't forgive him for those. I'm like, can you fuck off with that? But otherwise, it's good.
Any other questions, comments?
Concerns? No. Well, I appreciate you both hanging out with me.
I'm excited to read it.
Awesome. I appreciate it. I think we're good. Yeah.